Hey, it's King Kaiju here, and Amazon's Rings of Power is just like herpes in that it is the gift that keeps on giving, and also like herpes, the people who have it are often in denial. Buckle up, folks, because this gets stupid and gets stupid quick. But before we dive in, please do me a big solid by hitting that subscribe button with the notification and like the video. Here we go. So the wonderful people at Bounding Into Comics have yet again unearthed a nice little gem. This time, the title is Amazon Executives Admit Company is Still Being Intentionally Deaf About Fan Feedback for Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. There's also another little bomb that they drop at the end, so stay tuned for that. So we start off basically quoting Amazon Studios executive Vernon Sanders, who's the head of global television. So he recently admitted that the company is still completely ignorant of fan feedback surrounding Lord of the Rings of Power. And then we start to get into some of the details about kind of what they did, and it gets really scary. So Sanders admitted that the company conducted their own study to try to determine how people would react to the show. It's, okay, audience feedback, pretty staple in the industry. So he said, we set up our own study with thousands of people, thousands of Lord of the Rings fans. Not exactly sure how they determined that. I guess it's a checkbox or something. To really have a conversation with them as each episode dropped, just understand how they were reacting. You could have watched a slew of YouTube videos and found that out, but okay, spend the money. We were doing as much of a 360 comprehensive look to really understand it. This is all corporate speak, good God. And I think we got a lot of those Lord of the Rings fans, both fans of the books and fans of the movies, which is an interesting claim because he's kind of implying that they are different. Because again, they've kind of had this thing since day one. There's been other interviews, you can find them, where they really trashed the Peter Jackson film. Even at one point, not necessarily them, but one of the Tolkien saying it was too accurate. You want to think about that real hard? But okay, let's keep going because there's a lot to unpack here. So he then goes on. We also know that there were some fans who had issues or didn't feel like this was what they were expecting or done in the way they expected, and that's natural. Now, got to stop here because this is the defense that not just Amazon, Marvel, and any other studio that gets a lot of fan backlash about their product when their product ignores the source material. They say, well, it's what they expected, and that's why they didn't like it. Their expectations were too high is the implication. Their expectations weren't too high. Their expectations was that you would honor the source material. Yes, there's some people who are asking for a frame-by-frame, shot-by-shot, line-by-line remake, but that is an extreme minority. The bulk of the fan base is saying, look, we got that you're translating paper to film, or you're translating comic to TV, or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be exact, but there are core ideas, there are core concepts, there are core characters and core character traits that we realistically expect to be translated onto your work. And when they're not, fans get upset. And it is if they're expecting you to do a good job and you failed them, then yes, this applies. But that's not what they're saying. Got to keep going here. He says, I think whenever you take on something that's so beloved, you're going to have probably a strong reaction and have some people who just aren't on board. Again, they'll be on board if you respect the source material. So he didn't go into other details, but Amazon Studios embarrassed themselves when they claimed to have brought in a number of Lord of the Rings super fans to a screening of the show's trailer in Mallorca. That's their claim, right? However, these superfans didn't seem at all interested in The Lord of the Rings when they cut a number of promotional videos attempting to promote the show. Rather, they put the focus on the identity politics instead. So ostensibly, Amazon's like, hey, we invited a bunch of superfans to watch the trailer. And then superfans did their little interviews, YouTube videos, media appearances, whatever else, where they described the trailer or round table. And so one superfan said, quote, I also want to say representative because we're getting more diversity within this series. Like, we're seeing our first black elf. We're seeing the first female dwarf. I'm very looking forward to looking at that. They obviously hired idiots, but nonetheless, that's not anything to do with the lore, with being a super fan. So these are clearly not super fans. They're paid shills. And they're not just paid shills, but in the most insane bit of stupidity that I think I've rarely heard, the studios actually thought, okay, look, our plan is this. We're going to pay a bunch of shills, say that they're Tolkien super fans, and instead of having them watch the trailer and going out there and saying, as a super fan, I think that this really honored Tolkien and his spirit. Amazon has made some interesting changes that I think people are going to love. Then people might have been like, well, super fans said they honored it, so maybe I should see it. Because, of course, it's all about just getting the single clicks, right? But instead, Amazon's like, okay, we want you to not do that. We want you to push the fact that this is full of identity politics, because I guess they think that that's going to sell. Okay, let's go down that rabbit hole. Then why would you claim they're super fans at all? Just say there was a test screening and have the people go, oh, diversity, the message. But no, they conflated one with the other. Executive stupidity on display. There's tons more. Not only were these so-called superfans pushing identity politics rather than discussing Tolkien, as I ever said, one later admitted to not even watching the show. And it says, YouTuber Ryan Kinnell, who's amazing, watch his stuff, discovered that Chanel Williams, one of the so-called superfans, did a video where she revealed she hadn't even watched the show. She claimed she was going to binge it once the season ended. Also revealed she was watching House of the Dragon weekly. Something that's very good. Of course she didn't watch it. She's a paid shill. Watched the trailer, and they gave her money to say bullcrap. So if the people Amazon used to perform their study are anything like their so-called super fans, they flew into Mallorca to watch the trailer, the study is probably heavily skewed, and some of them aren't even watching the show altogether. Duh. It's not skewed, it's paid. However, this wasn't the biggest reveal that Sanders made, so hopefully you've stuck around. Here's the big gut punch at the end. He actually briefly discussed the Charlie Vickers Halbrand being revealed as Sauron in the final episode, which was, of course, a surprise to absolutely no one. While discussing Sauron, Saunders made it clear Amazon Studios and Prime Video were not listening to the fans of J.R.R. Tolkien and Lord of the Rings, who had made it abundantly clear the show was terrible, mainly due to the fact that it completely threw Tolkien's writing into the waste bin in favor of modern woke sensibility. So Saunders is again quoted in his fine corporate speech. One of the challenges for this show, when you're adapting something to tell the story people are excited to see, sometimes find ways to surprise them. Wrong. That's not the point. You're adapting source material. And the fans are not watching it to be surprised. They're not watching it to say, oh, since I already know what happens, I need to be surprised. That's the corporate mind thought. But instead, they're watching it to say, okay, I've read a book, I've read a comic book, I've created fill-in-the-blank worlds and ideas in my mind. That's the joy of reading, you idiot. Now someone is going to adapt that onto film, so I'm going to see their interpretation of what the fill-in-the-gap imagery from the source material is, and I'm going to be interested to see how that compares with mine. Exactly what Peter Jackson did and walked away with $1 billion+. But no, Amazon doesn't want to do that. So then Saunders really sticks foot in mouth. Quote, Sauron, I would argue the greatest villain of all time, and you would be wrong. He is very, very good in the books. Don't get me wrong. But what you did to him, hell no. How do you get to know that person? How do you get to understand how they work? What are the layers there? The answer is whatever's in the book and nothing more, because Tolkien and many other good writers understand very large appeal of villains is you don't know a lot about the mystery is what makes part of the appeal. Part of the reason the original trilogy for Star Wars is hated and derived, well, there's a lot of reasons, but one of it is we're not really interested in knowing or seeing innocent little boy Darth Vader. Darth Vader was redeemed later on. Dave Filoni, Jon Favreau, thank you so much. No one wants to see that. We're not interested in seeing. Yes, we understand people change. We understand that no one is just born evil, quote unquote. But that's not really interesting. That's not what we want to see. We want to see epic struggles of good versus evil. And the more evil that evil is, the less evil's understood, the less evil's explained, the better. Now, you're going to see here in a minute, Tolkien gave an entire history for Sauron that they trapped. But let's continue with the ignorance. And I think Because of the way the story was told, and because the great performances, Charlie Vickers and Morfond, where the hell her name is, Clark, I think audiences now have an insight whether he fooled them or whether they knew it the entire time. They knew it the entire time. There's a much more interpersonal human side of this character, which is what you don't want. We are not looking for an interpersonal human side to the villain. What about that don't you get? This should be writing 101, right? Except I guess the writers never went to writing school. And I'm so excited for people to see Sauron unleashed in season 2. Well, people aren't, and your ratings reflect it. But all right, the show butchers the character of Sauron. They don't show his actual fall, his chance at repentance, penance, and obedience, his rejection of it, and then his complete turning into a reincarnation of evil. Tolkien laid out Sauron's character arc in letter 131 to Wilton Maulding, writing in the Silmarillion and Tales of the First Age. Sauron was a being of Valinor perverted to the service of the enemy and becoming his chief captain and servant. Now, this is important on a couple levels. First of all, it's in a letter. It's not even technically part of the lore if you wanted to get into semantics. Certainly, people will say, well, every single thing Tolkien written is lore. Others will say, well, if it's not in the books, it's just thoughts. Doesn't matter. I'm not going to get down that. What I'm going to get down the road of, though, is that he perverted to the service of the enemy. Now, Tolkien is no idiot. That's well documented. Word choice is paramount. And that indicates that there's not A, B, C, D. Perverted. How is he perverted? It's open to interpretation. Mind it like you will. And then he continues to go into a little bit more detail, but again, keeps it vague enough to make an interesting character. Tolkien continues, he repents in fear when the first enemy is utterly defeated, but in the end, does not do as was commanded. Return to the judgment of the gods. He lingers in Middle-earth very slowly, beginning with fair motives, the reorganization and rehabilitation of the ruin of Middle-earth, that has been, quote, neglected by the gods, unquote. He becomes a reincarnation of evil and a thing lusting for complete power and so consumed ever more fiercely with hate, especially of gods and elves. Vague, not concrete, not humanized, just a little framing backstory for Tolkien to use when he writes motivations and ideas and words moving forward. All through the twilight of the Second Age, the shadow is growing in the east of Middle-earth, spreading its sway more and more over men who multiply as the elves begin to fade. Okay, so the time the events of the Second Age that the Rings of Power takes place in, Sauron has already chosen his path and has completely rejected forgiveness, repentance, penance, and obedience, as indicated by that letter. His interpersonal side has been consumed by his hate and lust for power. They do point out, say he doesn't play a role, Anatar, by deceiving the elves and aiding them to create the Ring of Powers, does that in Tolkien's work, and it is indeed a role that he plays fueled by his hatred and lust for power. He deceives the elves and uses their own pride to aid them in the crafting of the Rings of Power and eventually the One Ring. So the Amazon show, the Rings of Power, completely casts this wildly interesting, intriguing story in the trash because they wanted to surprise. However, they didn't just want to surprise people. They fell to the will of Sauron themselves and thought they could tell the story better than Tolkien. That was a nice jab there. They can't use the first season as a pass. As the first season proves, and the fact that Sauron admits the focus of Sauron on the first season was try to humanize him, proves they just failed out of the thing middle. It proves that despite whatever studies they performed, they are not listening to Tolkien and Lord of the Rings fans. More importantly, they are not listening to J.R.R. Tolkien himself. And to all that, I would say, of course they're not. In case no one has noticed, we are plagued with a raft of new young writers in Hollywood across every spec that not only are activists first, writers second, but more importantly, terrible writers. And they're terrible writers for a magnitude of reasons, but some of the biggest that I've seen is number one, and this could possibly be the biggest, is they do not accept everything has been done before. These idiots are convinced they are going to reinvent the wheel. If you give them a source material like Lord of the Rings, everything J.R. Tolkien wrote, if you give them Campbell's The Hero's Journey, they look at that and go, well, I've seen that before. I can do better. I can come up with something new. No, you can't. You can't. In fact, if you look back at some of the greatest things written, they didn't come up with something new. What they did is placed their spin on core writing concepts, such as the hero's journey. Star Wars, often cited as a template, and because George Lucas admitted he used Campbell's hero's journey for Luke Skywalker, but it isn't the first to do that, isn't the last film to do that. There have been great films that have utilized that idea. You can still make great, compelling, interesting, and quote, unique, unquote, content based on core concepts. You are not going to come up with a new core concept. We've had thousands of years of writers far more talented than you, young writer, to do that, and they have. All right. Second is that there is this thing amongst Hollywood and many writers, I mean comics as well, that they fail to understand the fundamental purpose of their medium that they work in. I don't care if it's fiction books, film, television, comic books. This is escapist entertainment. People indulge in these mediums to escape from their reality. That is the way it has been since the first, ancient human decided to tell a story around a campfire. We are not looking to see everyday, regular life in our escapist entertainment. We are not looking to see people like us and representing us in escapist entertainment. We are looking to see people, creatures, I guess, if you want to go down this road, that we can aspire, that are better than us, more competent than us, that struggle against adversity and overcome it because we ourselves wish to struggle adversity and overcome it. These are core basic concepts. I don't even know why I'm talking about this because obviously the writers aren't watching this. You guys get the idea. So I'm going to cut myself off. What do you think? Let me know in the comment section below.